Hey guys, tonight, we're setting sail beneath a velvet sky where stars shimmer so brightly they almost seem to whisper, "You're not in a city anymore." There's no buzzing phone, no glowing screen, no traffic hum. Just you, barefoot on the deck of a voyaging canoe, gliding silently through the open Pacific. The sail creaks gently above, the wind strokes your face like a lullaby, and the moon floats like a paper lantern just out of reach. Somewhere in the warm night, the ocean breathes a rhythm older than history itself. Now you're about to travel hundreds of miles with no compass, no map, and no written instructions. Just some oddly bent sticks, a few seashells, and a night sky. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're swaying slightly now, not from tiredness, but from the rhythm of the waves. You're on a waka, a Polynesian voyaging canoe, its twin hulls slicing through the water with elegance that feels rehearsed. You can't tell how far you've come or where exactly you're going. And that's the point. The ocean is your map, or at least it would be if this culture believed in maps the way we do. The stars above are pinned to black silk, undimmed by light pollution, tracing arcs that whisper directions if you know how to listen. You stare at the Big Dipper, it's familiar, but it's also not called the Big Dipper here. It's part of Te Ika a Maui, the fish of Maui, and it tells a different kind of story. Here the stars aren't dots on a grid. They're landmarks that rise and fall, guiding the canoe, not to places marked X, but to swells and winds, shadows and feelings. In the West, history books often start oceanic navigation with sextants and longitude and a certain air of superiority. But in this moment, as you lean into the creak and hush of the canoe, it's hard not to feel humbled. These waters were crossed 1,000 years before Columbus ever misread a map. And they were crossed not with charts, but with sensation. Mainstream historians finally agree on this. Much Polynesians were some of the most advanced non-instrument navigators in human history. Their voyages stretched from Hawaii to Aotearoa, Rapa Nui, to Tahiti, a triangle of scattered islands that somehow formed a connected world. But how did they do it? How did they know where they were going? The truth, like the ocean, is both deep and elusive, and it starts with paying attention to what doesn't usually show up on maps: the soft curl of a swell, the flight path of a seabird, the color of deep water when clouds shift above it. Tonight, you're not steering, someone else is. An invisible navigator with invisible tools who doesn't look down at a map, but up into the sky and forward into memory. You run your hand along the edge of the canoe. The wood is smooth, burnished by salt and time. In the quiet, your ears begin to pick up subtleties: the slap of water on hull, the faint creaking of lashings holding everything together. There's no metal here, no nails. Everything's tied, not hammered, flexible, forgiving. Like the knowledge itself. Somewhere in the dark, your guide shifts slightly. He doesn't speak much. His brow is furrowed, but not in worry, just deep listening. He closes his eyes. You watch him move one hand slightly in the air. Then he opens his eyes again, and the canoe subtly shifts direction. You want to ask what he saw, but there was nothing to see. He was feeling the swells. Historians still argue whether these swell patterns could really be read like roads. But in this boat on this night, it doesn't feel like a debate. It feels like trust. There's something gently funny about it too. Back home, you might get lost using GPS in a grocery store parking lot. But here, a navigator can find a speck of land smaller than a Walmart in the middle of 1,000 miles of nothing. And they did it without calling anything a map. Here's the trick. Polynesian navigators didn't think about maps as fixed pieces of paper. They thought about relationships between stars and islands, wind and current, bird and cloud. A fixed map assumes you stay still and the world moves around you. But here you are moving, and the world is your constant companion. It's a bit like trying to fold the ocean into a glove compartment. In fact, one navigator famously said, "The island doesn't move, you move toward it." That's not just poetic, it's how the whole system works. As you breathe in the salt air, you can almost feel your brain starting to loosen its grip on coordinates and instead drift into patterns. There's a star rising at your left shoulder, which means the current is curling behind you. A bird calls once, twice, then flies off to the right. That means land isn't far, but it might be the wrong island. Still, the pattern is forming. You reach into the water. It's warm. Not because it's shallow, but because the ocean here breathes with the equator. You think of stories you've read of shipwrecks and misnavigation, and 18th century explorers drawing sea monsters in the margins. They didn't get it. They drew what they feared. Polynesian navigators drew what they knew into their minds, not onto paper. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a question arises like a wave. How did they teach this? How do you pass on invisible knowledge? We'll get there. But first, let's look at the map that isn't a map. The one made of sticks and string. The one that confuses even museums. The one that makes sense only when you let go of the idea that maps must look like anything. You're sitting cross-legged now in a small thatched shelter, the kind that might line the shore of a low coral atoll. The sand beneath you is warm from the sun, and the wind is gentle enough to keep mosquitoes polite. An elder sits opposite you, hunched over a frame of curved sticks, shells, and string. It looks more like a cat's cradle accident than any map you've ever seen. This is your first glimpse of a stick chart. Specifically, a rebelib, a navigational aid from the Marshall Islands in Micronesia. Not Polynesia, technically, but close enough in seafaring tradition that the knowledge overlaps. You lean closer, trying to decode it. The elder raises an eyebrow. This, they seem to say with a slight smile, is not for your eyes. It's for your hands, for your memory. Mainstream historical fact. Stick charts were real tools used to teach ocean navigation, but they weren't meant to be used at sea. That's the first twist. You don't consult a stick chart like a sailor consults a map. You study it at home, memorize the relationships, and then leave it behind. A visual rehearsal, a memory palace of waves. The long curved sticks represent swells, some steady, some shifting, some caused by distant islands reflecting the ocean back, like ripples in a bathtub. The shorter cross sticks, those might be directional guides. And the cowrie shells. They're not always islands, believe it or not. Sometimes they represent swell intersections, invisible crossroads out in the water. You squint. It still looks like abstract art. The elder points to a node, then mimics the motion of a wave with their palm. You nod, pretending you understand. You don't. But you're starting to realize that's okay. Understanding isn't the point. Feeling is. Fringe tidbit. There's a legend that some navigators could sense islands long before they were visible by detecting the interference of reflected swells. Some researchers even tried blindfolding trained wayfinders and found that they could still tell what direction the canoe was drifting, based solely on the motion beneath them. You think of your office chair. It has never told you this much, and yet there's a deep cultural humility in all of it. You might expect some fanfare, some heroic titles, some shouted declarations like, "I have discovered this island." Nope. These were not explorers in the European sense. They weren't discovering places. They were returning, reconnecting. The word for landfall wasn't conquest. It was often something like reunion. Historians still argue whether stick charts were widely used or more symbolic like heirlooms of knowledge rather than day-to-day tools. Some say only a handful of navigators truly used them. Others believe they were once more common, but colonization erased much of the surrounding context. The charts that survive may just be a small sample, like a single puzzle piece from a box long since thrown away. You reach out, gently touching one of the shells. The elder chuckles softly and rotates the chart. From this new angle, it looks completely different. A reminder that perspective matters. That movement changes meaning, just like out on the ocean, where no wave ever arrives the same way twice. You try to imagine carrying this knowledge in your head. Thousands of swell patterns, star paths, migratory cues, and weather behaviors. No notebooks, no cheat sheets, just stories, songs, lessons tied to memory like knots in string. There's something comforting about the impermanence of it. If the chart breaks, the knowledge doesn't vanish. It's stored in someone's bones, in their nightly dreams, in the calluses of their hands. You lean back and look up. The sky is beginning to purple. Soon the stars will come out again, and your learning will continue under their glow. But for now, you're still wrapped in the abstraction of the stick chart. There's a joke someone once told, you don't read a stick chart, you unread it. It gets funnier the longer you sit with it. Because the chart's power isn't in what it shows. It's in how it helps you forget your modern habits, like expecting the ocean to stay still, or assuming that north is always up. You shift on the sand, feeling the warmth ebb away with the setting sun. The wind rustles the fronds above. Somewhere a conch shell sounds in the distance, a signal that dinner's almost ready. But your mind is still tangled in sticks and string, trying to see the sea the way navigators once did. Not as a blank expanse, not as a danger, but as a rhythm, a memory, a presence that holds you more than you hold it. If you had to sail tonight, you'd be hopeless. But maybe you'd remember how that one curved stick aligned with the shell and how that meant the wave would be coming from behind the canoe. It's not much, but it's a start. The elder begins to take the chart apart. It was never meant to last, and that's okay. You'll carry the shape of it in your head, where it can shift and change like the sea itself. The stars begin to blink on above you one by one, and you're starting to feel it now, that peculiar sense that maybe you've been looking at the wrong kinds of maps your whole life. The stars are brighter now, sharp against the soft blackness above. You lie back on a woven mat belly full of taro and fish and gaze upward as if the sky itself is slowly unfurling just for you. It's hard to imagine navigating by them, so many so similar, all scattered like powdered sugar over midnight. A gentle voice beside you murmurs something. It's your guide again, pointing at a line of stars rising one after another along the eastern horizon. You blink at first, they look random. But then the pattern emerges, a star line, a celestial path. This is how Polynesian navigators used the sky, not like a static map pinned to the heavens, but as a timepiece, a rhythm, a performance. The stars didn't tell you where you were. They told you when to turn, when to hold course, when to expect land. Each one rising or falling in a certain sequence was a cue, a cosmic traffic signal for voyagers. Mainstream fact: Polynesians used what's called the sidereal compass. It divided the horizon into 32 or more points, marked by where specific stars rose and set. These points stayed the same year to year. So once you memorized where Capella rose in the east and where Aldebaran dipped in the west, you had your bearings. But here's the rub: that doesn't mean they were using the stars like a map. That's our language, not theirs. No latitude and longitude. No coordinates. Just lived experience, oral memory, and a dizzying mental calendar. You can't quite believe anyone could keep straight without an app. You roll onto your side and glance at your guide again. He's quietly reciting something under his breath, an old chant, a kalai, wa'a, or navigation chant. You don't recognize the words, but the cadence is unmistakable. It's not just poetry, it's instruction. Each verse contains a direction, a star, a swell, a warning, fringe tidbit. One famous chant from the Caroline Islands contains hundreds of lines, each representing different legs of a voyage. Sing it too quickly, and you'll miss an island. Too slowly, and you might overshoot. Think of it like a GPS that sings. Historians still argue whether these chants were memorized by everyone, or if only elite navigators knew them. Some evidence suggests families passed them down privately, like heirlooms of cosmic authority. Others believe many were lost, deliberately hidden, when colonizers arrived, or abandoned when children were forced into Western schools. But tonight, in the hush of this island night, the chant lives on. You can hear the stars being named, not cataloged. You can feel the pause in the guide's voice as he notes a shift in the wind. There's meaning in the silence too. And now you're beginning to understand something strange. These star lines aren't maps, because maps are fixed. And the ocean. The ocean is never still. It's not a place. It's an experience, a living thing. And these navigators, they're not readers of maps. They're interpreters of feeling. It's almost funny. Modern astronomy is so proud of its precision, parallax, redshift degrees, arc minutes. But here, lying under the same stars, you're hearing about navigation in terms like soft star and strong star, or father wave and child wave. It's not scientific, it's poetic, and somehow it works. You remember the joke from earlier about unreadable maps? Well, this is the next step, a map that sings a compass, that rises in song and memory. You sit up slowly. The breeze carries the faint scent of breadfruit and salt. The fire's embers crackle behind you. Overhead, the Southern Cross tilts gently to one side, and your guide lifts a hand toward it. This one tells you when to sleep, he says. You smile. It's a joke, probably, or maybe not. You imagine trying to sail by this method, memorizing the rising times of dozens of stars, each matched to a direction, a temperature, a kind of bird you might see nearby. You'd have to feel the ocean's breathing through the canoe, anticipate what kind of clouds drift over particular atolls, and still get your timing right. You chuckle. Back home, you once missed your exit while following Google Maps with the voice on. Here, you'd be fish food in an hour. But somehow this doesn't feel alien anymore. It feels familiar in a dreamlike way, like something you knew once and forgot. Like your body could remember it if you just gave it time. Your guide finishes the chant and looks up at you. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't need to. You're both sharing something now, a space between silence and knowledge, between memory and sky. The stars continue rising. You lie back again, watching them crawl upward, like slow dancers in an eternal play. It's not that they lead you somewhere. It's that when you're ready, they let you find your own way. The next morning, you find yourself kneeling beside a low platform in the shade, a palm frond roof rustling gently above. A few curious kids scamper nearby, one of them expertly chewing on sugar cane, while another is dragging a sea cucumber around like a reluctant pet. On the mat in front of you lies a curious object, thin pieces of wood, some straight, others curved, all bound together with coconut fiber. Scattered across the frame are tiny cowrie shells, their polished surfaces glinting like misplaced teeth. This is another stick chart, but different from the one you saw yesterday. This type is called a meadow. It's more abstract, less sprawling, something between a diagram and a riddle. Your guide today, it's a different elder, soft-spoken, but with the steady hands of someone who has braided 1,000 fish traps motions for you to come closer. You think this is a map, they ask in a dry tone. You hesitate. You do think that? Sort of. It looks like a map. It has lines and points, and a shape, kind of. But now you're not so sure. You shrug, and the elder smiles, like that's the only honest answer. Mainstream fact, the meadow was one of the teaching tools used by navigators in the Marshall Islands. But here's the thing, none of these charts are scaled, none are drawn to proportion, and very few are oriented in any consistent way. They're not meant to help you see the sea. They're meant to help you feel it. You tilt your head, tracing one of the curved sticks. It bows from one corner to another, arching over 2 cowrie shells. You guess waves. The elder nods. The swell from the east. These 2 shells, the direction it splits when it hits an island. Fringe tidbit. In some traditions, there are swells that don't even originate from local winds. They're called distant swells, generated by storms hundreds or even thousands of miles away, invisible and forgotten, except in the way they bend around certain islands. Navigators remember these ghost swells the way you remember a scar from a childhood tumble. Historians still argue whether these stick charts were intended as sacred teaching tools or simply illustrative memory aids for beginners. Some say they were never used by the master navigators at all, just made later. Perhaps even for the benefit of curious outsiders. Others argue passionately that the surviving charts in museums are echoes of something much deeper, but misunderstood. Either way, this particular chart, before you now, is not a souvenir. You're not allowed to take a photo. The elder makes that clear with a single-pointed glance at your non-existent phone. This is not knowledge to be captured. It's knowledge to be absorbed. You notice that some of the lines intersect in confusing ways. They don't follow logical angles like you'd expect from a Western-style map. One shell sits alone almost off the edge. You point. Is this an island? The elder chuckles. It's an idea, they say. You're not sure if they're being metaphorical or just tired of explaining, but it clicks for you in a quiet way. Maybe this isn't about literal navigation at all. Maybe it's about relationships, between places, between swells, between people. The chart isn't wrong because it's not accurate. It's right in its own strange language. You think about the way your phone's GPS talks to you, bossy, impatient, always certain. This chart is the opposite. It asks questions. It nudges you. It reminds you that travel is also about humility. The elder begins to disassemble the chart, slowly pulling apart the bindings. You watch as the delicate intersections come undone. Nothing breaks. Nothing is lost. Like a spider web carried away by wind, it leaves behind a pattern you can still see when you close your eyes. You help gather the pieces gingerly at first, but then with more confidence. The sticks are light and flexible, like the knowledge itself. When you place them into the woven bag, they almost seem to hum with salt and story. One of the kids from earlier walks by, now holding a sea urchin and looking entirely too smug about it. You smile, and he sticks out his tongue in reply. Clearly, mastery of ocean knowledge takes time. Before you leave, the elder places a single shell in your hand, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder. Feel the wave, they say. Then they turn and walk away, leaving you holding a fragment of something you'll never fully understand. But maybe that's the point. You wander back toward the shore. The tide is higher now, the air thick with the scent of algae and warm stone. You sit on a rock, the shell still in your hand, and listen. No waves crash here. They curl. They whisper. They pass you by without apology. And somewhere out there, those same swells are brushing against another island, one that might not even be on any map. But to a navigator who knows the rhythm, it's as real as the sun on your neck. Maps, you realize, are overrated, especially the kind that demand to be understood rather than felt. It's just before dawn when your guide wakes you with a gentle nudge of the foot. You blink yourself upright, unsure at first whether it's still night or already morning. The world is tinted in cool blue, the air damp with salt and dew, and everything is muffled as though the sky itself is holding its breath. You're going out again, not far, but far enough to feel the rhythm of the water beneath a hull. The canoe waits at the shoreline like a quiet beast. You clamber aboard the woven lashings, creaking faintly as you settle into your spot. No motor, no anchor, no compass. Just the sea your guide and the rising light of a new day. This trip isn't about getting somewhere. It's about learning how to move, and not just move through the water, but with it. Your guide says nothing for a long while. He's staring at the horizon. Eventually, he points not at a bird or an island or a wave, but at the faintest dip in the sky's color. You feel that. You don't. Not yet. But you nod anyway. Mainstream fact. Polynesian navigators didn't rely solely on the stars or stick charts. They also read the ocean's swells. These aren't just random bumps in the water. Swells are formed by wind blowing across thousands of miles. Each swell has its own tempo, direction, and even personality. Experienced navigators can feel the interaction of multiple swell systems and know what lies beyond the horizon. You close your eyes and try. The canoe pitches gently. Then again, But this time the rise is slightly different, longer, smoother. Then a shorter lift follows, intersecting swell patterns. You open your eyes. Your guide nods once. You've started to feel the beat. Fringe tidbit. In some traditions, navigators would lie flat in the bottom of the canoe, eyes closed, absorbing the subtle variations of the ocean's motion training. Their bodies like tuning forks. One navigator reportedly knew when he'd crossed into the influence of a different island's swell just by how his ribs felt, the canoe shifting. Historians still argue whether this technique is physiological fact or cultural myth. Some scholars believe the body's sensitivity has been exaggerated, while others suggest Western science simply hasn't learned how to measure it yet. Either way, your back is getting damp, and the wooden slats feel surprisingly communicative. Your guide finally speaks. The waves are the footprints of islands. You turn to look at him. Footprints. He nods. Even when you can't see them, the islands leave traces. The waves remember. You think of all the forgotten things in your life. Notes, deleted photos, lost places passed through without thinking. You wonder if any of those left behind waves of their own. You ask your guide how many types of swell there are. He shrugs. Maybe 6, maybe 60. Depends how well you listen. And then slowly he begins to describe them. There's lau lau, the long lazy swell that tells of calm winds. There's moana haka, the heavy short chop that comes after storms. And then there's tamaiti moe, literally sleeping child, a rare, almost imperceptible pulse that suggests land nearby still unseen, cradling the sea around it. You smile at that one. The idea that an island might be napping beneath the waves like a child tucked in under a blue blanket is, well, oddly soothing. The sun creeps up, turning the water gold. The canoe glides on. You're not doing anything heroic, not discovering new lands, or charting unknown currents. You're just sitting feeling. And that, apparently, is the whole point. There's a quiet humor to it. In the age of satellites, sonar, and apps that track your heartbeat here, you're learning to navigate by the feel of your butt in a canoe. It shouldn't work, but it kind of does. You try to name the swell you're feeling now, not the long one that's easy, but the shorter ripple that seems to be dancing at an angle. Is it cow-cow? Maybe. Your guide doesn't say. He just hums quietly. You hum too. And the canoe rocks a little more gently. Back on shore later, as you dry off in the sun, someone asks you where you went. You don't know what to say. You didn't go to anywhere. But you did go. Somewhere invisible. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere beneath your skin. And now that you're back, the land feels different. Still. Loud somehow. You can't stop thinking about the line, waves are the footprints of islands. That means even the tiniest speck of rock, even the most remote and unnamed atoll, is leaving a message behind, looping and rolling through the water, waiting for someone to feel it. You wonder how many things in your life have been whispering to you like that, leaving subtle, rhythmic clues. Maybe you just weren't trained to listen. Yet. The sky is bleached with midday light, now so bright it erases the horizon. You're sitting in the shade of a leaning breadfruit tree, fanning yourself lazily with a woven palm fan someone handed you earlier. You'd never thought of yourself as the fanning type. But after days in the tropics, you found a new respect for the slow flap of handmade breeze. Beside you, your guide drops a handful of sand onto a cloth. Then another. Then arranges a line of small pebbles in a curious curve. You squint. Is he making a beach picnic diagram? Nope. Another map. Or something like a map. Only this one's made entirely of sand and memory. Mainstream fact. In addition to stick charts and star paths, many Pacific navigators relied on mental maps, not drawn, not permanent, but sketched in sand as part of teaching rituals. These weren't geography lessons. They were rehearsals. You didn't just learn routes, you performed them. Out loud, with your hands. He taps the sand twice. That's your home island. then moves his finger in a gentle curve. This is the route to Namaluk, he murmurs, drawing a bend that weaves between two coral reefs. You lean in trying to memorize it, but your modern brain wants GPS pins, color-coded routes, a blinking blue arrow. No such luck. Fringe tidbit. In some ceremonies, navigators would recreate entire voyages using only sand shells, bits of bark, and chants. These performances could last hours and were passed on through generations like bedtime stories with incredibly high stakes. Forget a verse, and someone could end up beached on the wrong atoll with no food and a rising tide. Historians still argue whether these sand maps were ever meant to be literal or symbolic. Were they there to transfer actual data, or just reinforce confidence and intuition? Some believe they were mnemonic devices, tools to kickstart the memory. Others think they were more ceremonial, used to prepare spiritually before a voyage. Either way, they were never permanent. As soon as the teaching was done, the sand was smoothed flat again. You watch now as your guide brushes over the line he just drew. Gone. You feel a pang of disappointment, like watching the last bite of cake fall off your fork. But he smiles. Good. Now you try. Your hand hesitates. You draw a rough line pointing toward the imaginary horizon. He nods and hands you a pebble. That's the reef. You place it. Then another storm line. Then one more land breeze. Your map looks terrible, but he seems satisfied. You sit back and look at it. For a moment, you see nothing but random lines and dots. But then, like those pictures you stare at, cross-eyed, until they become a dolphin or a spaceship, it clicks. This is a feeling map. Not meant to be accurate in scale, but accurate in story. The swell here splits because of that reef. The wind dies here near dusk. The clouds shift this way after new moon. It's a map of relationships, not geography. And then something strikes you. Maybe you've been thinking about maps wrong your whole life. A map isn't always a guide to places. Sometimes it's a guide to being, a guide to paying attention. There's a strange sort of joke buried in all of this. You've spent your life thinking of maps as tools of certainty, where things are where you are, how to get from A to B. But these maps whisper. Maybe, if you're lucky, and if you're kind. You sit with your sand creation for a while, watching shadows drift across it. Then the wind picks up, scattering the grains just slightly. You could fix it. But something about the erosion feels right. The ocean doesn't stay still. Neither should the map. Later that evening, as the stars begin to appear once more, first Venus. Then a shy wink from Rigel. You wonder how many of these invisible maps float around the world. Not just on islands, but in people's heads. In songs, in muscle memory, in family stories, passed over cooking fires. You start to suspect that everyone is carrying maps they don't even know they have. The way you always sit on a certain bench when you're sad. The way your grandmother remembered which plant cured a fever. The way your friend always knows which subway car gets you closest to the stairs. Maps are everywhere. Most just aren't drawn. Your guide taps your shoulder. Time to smooth it. You nod, and with a slow sweep of your palm, erase your creation. Gone, but not forgotten. Tonight, the wind has changed. It comes off the water in long sighs, rustling through the palms, with a voice like someone telling a secret in their sleep. You walk along the shore barefoot, the sand still warm from the day, the waves licking at your ankles like curious cats. You're not headed anywhere in particular. You're just tracing the island's edge. That's what your guide said this part of the learning was for, getting to know the land by walking its boundaries. You can't know the sea, he'd said, if you don't know the shape of your leaving. That stuck with you, like a poetic threat. Mainstream fact. On many islands in the Pacific, children were taught to memorize not only the positions of stars and the rhythms of waves, but also the precise shapes of their home islands, their contours, inlets, beaches, and cliffs. Why? Because when you approach land from sea, it rarely looks like the simple shape on a Western map. It changes with distance like clouds. But if you've walked every edge, every turn, every coconut grove and rocky outcrop, you'll know when you're almost home. You pause now at a small outcropping of coral rock. To your left, a tidal pool reflects the stars. A small crab scuttles past, seemingly annoyed at your presence. You whisper an apology. The crab does not forgive. There's a saying your guide shared earlier: islands are like faces. You only recognize them if you've stared long enough. Fringe, tidbit. In some oral traditions, young navigators were blindfolded and led around the island's perimeter, forced to memorize the curve of the coast, using only sound and the feel of the wind on their cheeks. A ridiculous concept until you realize that for many journeys, being able to hear an island before seeing it could mean the difference between landing safely and smashing your canoe into a reef. Historians still argue about the legitimacy of these accounts. Some suggest these stories are exaggerations, metaphors turned literal over time. Others argue that our modern skepticism is itself a kind of blindness. After all, sensory acuity isn't mythical, it's just neglected. You run your hand along a smooth bit of stone, then down into the damp sand. The tide is turning now. The edge of the ocean is curling inward again. In the darkness, the island feels like a creature pulling itself into a blanket. You're starting to understand that Polynesian navigation isn't just about where you are. It's about when and how and even who. You don't memorize directions. You absorb relationships between stars and time between land and language between you and everything else. There's a sort of humility in it. Western maps like to say, "You are here." Polynesian navigation asks, "Are you paying attention?" You spot a palm tree bent at a strange angle and remember the story from earlier. How during storms, islanders would hide behind trees like this, using their bend as a compass. If the wind slammed from the same side, you were still on your own island. If it didn't, well, maybe not. You shake your head smiling. A wind-powered palm compass. It's both absurd and brilliant, like someone navigating life based on where their laundry dries fastest. You continue walking. Every few steps the shore shifts. Now sand, now pebbles. Now a sudden drop into frothy tide. You start naming the changes in your head like a chant. Soft foot sand, rattling pebbles, toe-stub coral. It doesn't rhyme, and it definitely won't make the next Moana soundtrack, but it gets the job done. Eventually you round the last curve and spot the fire again in the distance, small flickering home-shaped. You sit on a fallen log and breathe in the scent of salt and driftwood. You think about how many people today get lost while holding a device that literally shows them the blinking blue dot of their location. But here, without any tools, with only your skin and ears and attention, you've started to feel found. The island isn't just your starting point. It's part of your compass. And by walking its edges, you've etched it into yourself. Not just the land, but what the land means in motion. You look up. The stars have returned, not in a rush, but in order. Patient, dependable, and just cryptic enough to keep you humble. You smile. Tomorrow you'll go further, but tonight you're exactly where you need to be. You're floating again back on the canoe, but this time it's night. The ocean is silk, barely moving, just enough ripple to remind you that you're not dreaming. Overhead, the stars stretch wider than you thought possible, the Milky Way smeared across the sky like someone dragged their thumb through stardust. Your guide says nothing, and neither do you. The silence is delicious. Just the hush of wood, skimming water, and the occasional creak of lashings. This is what he called the space between. Not just literal distance, but the sacred pause, the relationship between things. The hush between drumbeats, the breath between stars. Mainstream fact: Polynesian navigators used the night sky not just to orient themselves, but to track time seasons and even when to plant certain crops. The sky was a clock, a compass, a calendar, and a storybook all rolled into one. Star lines, or kaweinga, mapped paths across the ocean. These weren't just imagined lines, they were memorized sequences telling which stars would rise and fall during a voyage. You lie back in the canoe, the wooden slats pressing gently into your shoulders, and try to see what they saw. Your guide lifts a hand and draws a line across the sky. There. See that triangle? That's the navigator's seat. You squint. The stars don't make a seat, not really. But after a moment, maybe it does look like a bent stool. Fringe. Tidbit. In some Polynesian traditions, entire constellations don't exist in the Western system. There are flying fish made of faint stars, celestial canoes paddling toward dusk, even stories of dangerous sharks lurking near particular clusters, warnings disguised as myths. One navigator claimed to use a star called the Eye of the Eel to mark a shift in swells near Tokelau. No telescope has ever identified it, but he swore it blinked when it mattered. Historians still argue whether these stories represent literal astronomy or metaphor layered onto the stars. Some scholars dismiss the star paths as narrative crutches, while others believe these oral constellations held just as much rigor as Greek ones, just different coordinates, different values. You glance at your guide, who's now humming softly under his breath. He points again. That's where the moon rises during harvest. You try to fix that in your mind. The spot over the sea where the moon is supposed to appear. It feels strange anchoring your sense of direction to something that isn't there yet. But that apparently is the whole point. Navigators didn't just follow stars, they anticipated them. The rising of a specific star might tell you when to turn, but you didn't wait for it. You knew when it would rise, where and what angle it would cut across your course. You try to imagine memorizing dozens of those lines. Hundreds? Some sailors were said to know over 150 star paths. That's not astronomy. That's choreography. A breeze picks up. The canoe shifts. Your guide adjusts the outrigger with a long pole still humming. You think about how much of your life has been ruled by clocks, minutes, notifications, to-do lists, all built around exactness. But here, out on the ocean, under this sky, navigation feels more like jazz. Improvisation rooted in deep knowledge. Not guessing, but trusting what you've absorbed. You whisper a question. What if the stars are hidden? He smiles in the dark. Then you feel the swells, the wind, the color of the sea. You nod, then realize the color of the sea. At night, you'd be surprised, he adds, not bothering to explain. You laugh. Of course you would. You tilt your head and focus. The stars don't twinkle out here. They shimmer steadily. You realize that's because the air is still. No smog, no city glow, no planes blinking overhead. Just space. Real velvet dark bone-deep space. Your guide begins to recite something now, a chant, soft and rhythmic. Names of stars, it seems. You catch bits. Hikianalia Arcturus, Te Waka o Tamarereti. You don't understand most of it, but the cadence wraps around you like a warm tide. Later, he explains, these chants are star catalogs. Not written, but sung. Memorized over years. Passed down. One chant might cover the rising and setting of stars for an entire voyage from Samoa to Hawaii. Another might guide you from Tahiti to Rapa Nui. He adds casually. We sing them to teach our children how to go home. Something about that knocks the wind out of you in the best way. You've always thought of navigation as getting from point A to B. But here, it's about returning. About being able to find your way back, even if you lose everything else. Above you, the navigator's seat slowly drifts westward. You realize the sky itself is moving not fast, but relentlessly. It was always moving. You just hadn't been still long enough to see it. You lie there for a while longer, just drifting, not lost, just floating in the AVA. By now, you've developed a new habit. Every time you open your eyes, the first thing you do is look up, not to check the weather or see if it's morning yet. You're searching for anchors, for star trails, for movement in the sky that once seemed static. Tonight, it's cloudy. A stubborn quilt of gray muffles the stars, hiding everything you've been learning to trust. The sea is a soft hiss. The canoe rocks gently, but without the heavens to triangulate against you, feel unmoored. Your guide doesn't seem worried. He pulls his cloak tighter, leans into the wind, and gestures at the water. No stars. Then listen. You frown. At what? Mainstream fact. When the sky disappears, Pacific navigators turn to the ocean's voice. Waves speak, though softly, and only to those who've trained their ears. Swells break against distant islands, bounce off underwater ridges, or blend with trade winds to create interference patterns that you can feel, if not always explain. It's a kind of echolocation, except it isn't bouncing off of walls, it's bouncing off the planet itself. You close your eyes and try to follow the canoe's rhythm. Left pause, right pause. Is that a cross swell, a reef wake, or just your stomach protesting the dried fish from dinner? Fringe tidbit. In rare cases, skilled navigators would tow a hand-carved paddle blade trailing in the water behind the canoe. By placing their fingers along the shaft, they could feel changes in water tension and vibration, interpreting these minute shivers as clues about current direction and approaching land. One sailor claimed he could tell when a shark was near, not by sight or smell, but by how the paddle ticked against the current. No one's replicated that claim. Yet, historians still argue whether such stories are poetic exaggerations or represent lost techniques. Some insist the physical sensitivity needed is real, but simply unteachable without immersion from childhood. Others suggest the line between faith and skill is deliberately blurred, perhaps to protect sacred knowledge from being co-opted or tested. You exhale and let the silence stretch. Then it hits you the water isn't silent. There's a low hum beneath the surface, a deep, faint rolling sound, a pulse, not mechanical, not even rhythmic, just present. It's unsettling and comforting all at once. Like hearing someone whisper your name in a dream. You shift forward and dip your fingers in the sea. The water slips through like silk. But there's tension now, the kind that comes before something. You can't explain it, but you're sure of it. Your guide seems to read your thoughts. A current from the east, he says. It's older than the wind. Let it pass. You nod, though you don't really understand. Still, the idea of an old current comforts you. Like the ocean has memories of its own flowing past your little canoe. You remember the maps made of sticks, the ones that aren't really maps, and wonder if anyone's ever tried to make a sound map. Could you sketch a current's song? Could you trace the tone of an oncoming island? You ask your guide. He shrugs. Some try, but sounds don't stay still. Why trap them? You sit back half disappointed, half in awe. You've spent your life trying to pin things down to define label file, but maybe some truths are more useful when they stay slippery. Eventually, you nod off. The canoe rocks gently like a crib. The sea hums its lullaby. Even the wind seems to respect the quiet. In the half-dream that follows, you see the sky open again. But the stars don't twinkle. They vibrate like tuning forks. Each one sings a slightly different note, and somehow, your body knows which way is home. You wake up before dawn, still no stars. But you're not worried anymore, because you remember something your guide said on your first day when you asked, "What happens if everything disappears? Stars swell skyland." He'd smiled and said, "Then you steer by your bones." You didn't get it then, but maybe you're starting to. You're not lost, just listening. You wake to birdsong thin and distant, riding the wind like a message from land. Your guide's already awake, crouched at the bow, chewing something green and fibrous. You don't ask. You've learned not to. He points out over the ocean. There, he says softly, clouds. Low ones. You squint into the horizon. It all looks like cloud soup. But after a few seconds, you notice something just above the water. A strange, still puff of white. While the rest of the sky moves lazily eastward, this one doesn't budge. Island cloud, your guide murmurs. Mainstream fact. In Polynesian navigation, stationary clouds often mark the presence of islands, especially ones still hidden beyond the curve of the earth. As the sun rises and warms the land, moisture evaporates and forms cumulus clouds directly above. If you know how to spot them, even distant land can give away its location hours before it becomes visible. You watch the cloud. It really doesn't move. Not like the others. It's thicker, more defined, slightly grayer underneath, and suddenly you see it an outline, faint, but there. Land. Your heart stutters like someone whispered your name in a crowd. Fringe tidbit. Some navigators claim they can smell land before they see it. The scent of flowers or wet stone riding the breeze. There's a famous tale of a blind Tongan sailor who, despite losing his sight in youth, guided canoes by smell alone. He could distinguish the scent of different atolls by the types of birds nesting there and the driftwood that washed up from their shores. Historians still argue whether such claims are credible. Scent, after all, is subjective. But modern studies have shown that airborne particles from land do indeed travel miles over open water. Whether you can train yourself to interpret them, that's another question. You breathe in deeply? Salt, sure, but something else. Sweetness, maybe, or just the power of suggestion. Hard to tell. Your guide shifts position. Waves are changing. You look down. The swells have gone lopsided, still rhythmic, but bent, like they're curving around something large ahead. This, he explains, is the final approach, the part where most mistakes happen. Because land is dangerous, it bites. Your heart jumps, he says. You want to go faster, but you must go slower. Listen harder. You nod. He stands now scanning the sky again. More birds. White, thin-winged ones darting in arcs. See them, they don't sleep at sea. If they're here, land's near, you're amazed by the number of signs converging clouds. Waves birds scent. None alone would have meant anything. But together, they make a symphony. It's funny you've never thought of navigation as a sensory experience. But this isn't about following coordinates. It's about receiving messages. From sky, water, featherstone. And more than that, it's about restraint. The discipline not to overreact. The willingness to wait. You look ahead again. The island is still barely visible. But it's there. Your body feels it. In the shifts of the wind. The way the canoe glides slightly differently. The faint roar still far off. Of waves hitting reef. You whisper a question. How did the first people find these? Your guide grins. No one knows. Some say we were born on land and taught to sail. Others say we came from the sea looking for land. Maybe both. There's a pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, maybe land found us. You let that sink in. You think of early voyagers setting out into what Westerners later called an empty ocean. But it was never empty. Not to them. It was full of messages if you knew how to listen. You smile. And for the first time you know how to listen. The canoe nudges slightly to the right as your guide shifts the sail. He says nothing. You do nothing. You're just there, part of the moment. And finally slowly land rises from the ocean. Not suddenly like in movies, but gently like a secret surfacing. A thin green line, then a slope, then a palm, then several. The sound of surf grows louder, layered with birdsong, and yes, that sweetness in the air again. Fragrant, sharp, undeniable. You've arrived, but you're not cheering, you're breathing, because this is what it feels like to earn your arrival. You step onto land like someone waking from a very long nap. Legs uncertain, eyes too wide. The sand feels foreign now, even though it used to be familiar. It's like you've learned the rules of the sea so deeply that the land feels like it's standing still on purpose, just to unsettle you. Your guide laughs when you wobble. You have sea legs now, he says, not unkindly. They'll betray you on shore. Mainstream fact. After long voyages, Pacific navigators and sailors often took time to reacclimate to land. Not just physically, though the swaying of the ground is a known effect, but mentally. Life on land moved differently. Time was measured in chores and seasons in ceremonies. at sea time bent around swell current and starlight. This island, whichever one it is, feels like the end of something. But your guide shakes his head when you say so. No, not an ending. Just another pulse in the pattern. You follow him inland. The path is narrow and shaded full of rustling. Birds you don't know the names of dart between branches. You catch flashes of red, yellow, emerald green. It's like walking through a living painting. Fringe tidbit. In some oral histories, the first thing a navigator did upon making landfall wasn't to rest or celebrate, but to gather soil or a rock, hold it and greet it. This wasn't superstition. It was a form of mapping. The shape, texture, and color of the land became a mental anchor tied to the stars and the journey. Some sailors even tasted soil, believing its flavor could help them remember the journey back. Historians still argue about how widespread or systematic this was. Some say it was metaphorical, a symbolic act misinterpreted by outsiders. Others insist that sensory mapping, including taste and scent, played a much larger role in ancient navigation than Western traditions have acknowledged. Your guide stops by a small spring. He squats cups water in his hands and drinks deeply. You do the same. It's cold and sweet with just a hint of minerals like melted quartz. Now you're part of the island, he says simply. You sit together under a breadfruit tree. Above the canopy filters sunlight into dappled warmth. A lizard scurries across your foot, totally unbothered by your presence. You wonder if the island recognizes you yet, or if it's still deciding. You ask your guide how he knows when to go back. He shrugs. When the stars say. But then he adds something else. Also, when the dreams change. You raise an eyebrow. The dreams. He nods. On land, your dreams are different. Slower. You dream of roots. At sea, they move. You dream of flight. When the flying dreams return, it's time to sail. You sit with that. There's something oddly scientific about it, even though it sounds like pure poetry. The body adjusting to rhythm. The mind mapping motion. You think about your own dreams since you started this journey. They've been strange. Not frightening, just open. Dreams where you float, always floating through memories that feel like they don't belong to you. Maybe those are ocean dreams. You walk to the edge of the forest. From here, you can just see the curve of the beach again. The canoe sits like it's resting, not abandoned. The outrigger glints in the sun, a gentle curve against the white sand. And that's when it hits you. You could leave now. You could. But you don't want to. Not yet. You're not finished listening. So, you stay. You help build a shelter from palm fronds and woven branches. You help dig yams and clean fish. You sit by the fire and ask questions you would have been too embarrassed to ask weeks ago. And at night, when the stars return, you lie back on the sand and try to trace the kavainga, the invisible star lines, across the sky. Sometimes your guide corrects you. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he just watches and smiles. The land teaches differently. It's quieter, slower, but no less precise. The way the wind moves through trees tells you something. The way the fruit drops at night tells you something else. The pattern of ants, the chirp of geckos, the lull between waves, all part of the ongoing map. You start keeping a rhythm again. Not a journal. Just a chant. A soft murmur you whisper to yourself at dusk. North swell. Birdsong early. Cloud shift west. Mango sweet. Fire smoke low. It doesn't rhyme. It doesn't scan. But it's yours. Your own kind of stick chart. Your own kind of map. It begins with a question innocent enough. You ask your guide how he learned all of this. He looks at you for a moment, as if trying to decide how honest he wants to be. I didn't learn it, he says. Finally, I remembered it. You blink, waiting for more, but that's all he offers. They were mainstream fact. In many Polynesian traditions, navigation isn't just a skill, it's a birthright. Passed not through books or official schools, but through apprenticeship, story, and observation. In places like Micronesia, master navigators pibabohont are initiated in sacred ceremonies. Once inducted, they're considered living libraries, guardians of ancestral pathways. There's no diploma, no certificate, just trust. You try to imagine being raised in that world, where knowledge isn't owned, it's inhabited, where the ocean isn't conquered, it's conversed with. You ask again, more gently this time, "What do you mean, remembered?" He scratches his chin. When you're young, you sit with the elders. They don't teach. They talk, you listen, you watch, you sleep under the stars, you eat what the sea offers. One day it clicks. You know something without knowing how you learned it. Like your hands already know how to tie a knot you've never practiced. Fringe tidbit. There's a belief among some navigator families that the knowledge of wayfinding is genetic, not just culturally inherited, but actually carried in the blood. One master navigator claimed he knew his son was ready to sail because the boy began humming chant rhythms in his sleep. Rhythms he'd never been taught. Historians still argue about this claim. Skeptics label it mysticism. Others, particularly anthropologists working closely with these communities, argue that such subconscious learning reflects years of ambient absorption, sensory and emotional data collected long before the conscious mind catches up. You sit with that. Think of all the things you've absorbed without realizing. Maybe learning is less about gathering and more about clearing away what's in the way. You start paying closer attention to your body, not just what you see or hear, but what you feel. The tug behind your eyes when the wind shifts, the low warmth in your stomach when clouds gather in the east. Are those instincts or memories or both? One night, your guide has you steer the canoe along the lagoon's edge just to get the feel, he says. The sail flaps, then fills. The outrigger hums against the water. He says nothing, just watches. You're not using instruments, not even a paddle to test direction, just your weight, your breath, the feel of the water along the hull. You whisper a chant to steady yourself, cloud over reef, wind warm, birds low, moon sleeping. You feel ridiculous at first, but it helps. You're sinking, not controlling matching, and suddenly you're not afraid. The water feels like it knows you, like it's holding you up. Your guide leans back and closes his eyes. Good, he murmurs. You grin. It's a small thing, but also not. The next morning you wake up before dawn. No one's around. The village is quiet. The fire's embers glow low and orange. You walk to the beach, sit in the sand. Wait. Eventually the stars fade. The sun lifts, and for the first time you realize you can find east without checking. Not by logic, not by compass, just by feel. There's a tug in your ribs, like a string pulled taut toward the sun, and you understand what your guide meant. You're not learning this. You're remembering it. You don't mark time by days anymore. Instead, it's birds when they leave, when they return. Winds when they shift. Stars how they climb. Your watch lies forgotten, tucked in a cloth bundle beneath your sleeping mat. It's tick, 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 far less useful than the chatter of the trees or the hush of incoming tide. Your guide calls you to the beach. His tone is lighter than usual. He's smiling in that quiet way of someone who knows something good is coming. You follow. The canoe is waiting. Not the old one, the big one. The one you've helped repair over the past few weeks, patching its planks with coconut fiber, polishing the outrigger arm until it gleamed like driftwood gold. Mainstream fact, long-distance voyaging canoes, called waka or vaca depending on the region, were the heart of Polynesian expansion. Built with astonishing precision, some were over 20 meters long, capable of carrying dozens of people and supplies across thousands of miles. These weren't primitive rafts. They were oceanic machines refined over centuries. You run your hand along the hull. It feels warm, alive. Your guide hands you a small bundle, coconut meat, dried breadfruit, a carved pendant strung on braided fiber. For the journey, he says. You blink. We're leaving. He nods. It's time. You don't argue. Fringe. Tidbit. Some navigators claim they receive dreams messages from ancestors telling them when and where to sail. These aren't visions with thunder and lightning. More often, they're quiet fragments, a color in the sky, a familiar scent, the face of a long-dead uncle, whispering the name of a current. The decision to voyage then isn't just practical, it's spiritual. Historians still argue whether these dream-guided journeys were literal or symbolic. Did the ancients really set sail on prophetic visions? Or were the dreams a mnemonic device, a poetic wrapper for knowledge stored deep in the subconscious? You're not sure. But when your guide says the stars are calling you, believe him. You help load the canoe. Water gourds, bundles of taro, firestones. You know the rhythm now. Balance weight, tie knots, check for rubbing points. When the canoe is full, you climb aboard. The others do too, some from your village, some from the next. Silent, reverent, like stepping into a temple. You push off, and just like that, you're sailing again. This time, though, something's different. You're not watching your guide. You're watching the sea. And more importantly, you're feeling it. The hull hums underfoot. You note the wind angle adjusts slightly. The outrigger slaps just once, then smooths. A correction. You knew what to do before you thought about it. You smile, not out of pride, but recognition. You belong here. Later, you sit near the stern tracing patterns on the inside of your wrist with your thumb. Not absent-mindedly, not fidgeting. You're remembering, because here's what no one tells you. These star maps everyone talks about, they were never for the eyes, they were for the body. They lived in the skin, the breath, the bones. The stick charts, the chants, the whispers, those were reminders, anchors, not directions. You begin humming your rhythm again, soft and steady. Mangrove wind, crabs inland, stars rise late, reef breaks long. It's different now. Not a chant of guessing, a chant of knowing. Your guide glances back, says nothing, because he knows too. The wind picks up slightly. You lean forward, readjusting the sail. Not by plan, by memory. The sea is quieter than you thought it could be. The waves roll under you like they're lulled to sleep, rhythmic and gentle. Their peaks brushing against the canoe as if brushing your hair back from your face. You've learned that this is the moment before the great shifts, the pause, where the sea gathers its strength, before it reveals something new. The horizon is a faint line of mist ahead, and though you've been sailing for hours, it seems like you've barely moved. You realize now that motion in the ocean is not about how fast you go, but how you move with it. It's about rhythm, not race. Mainstream fact. In many traditional Pacific voyages, it wasn't speed that was prized, it was patience. Skilled navigators would intentionally pace themselves, waiting for the right current or wind to carry them. If the sea didn't feel right, they would simply drift, using the time to observe, to listen. In a world where the journey could take months, it wasn't about reaching land. It was about knowing when to move and when to rest. You feel that now. You could check the stars. You could chart your position with the constellations you've memorized. But you don't. You just let the water carry you. For the first time, you realize how much you've been trying to control. Now it's more of a dance. A follow, not a lead. Your guide moves quietly across the canoe, preparing another bundle of dried fish. His movements are practiced effortless, like someone working in the kitchen. He doesn't seem to need any more direction. He knows where everything is, and more importantly, when. Fringe tidbit. On long voyages, the act of preparing food was more than just about nutrition. It was an important ritual. Preparing fish, wrapping breadfruit leaves, or stirring a pot of seaweed soup wasn't done mechanically. It was a moment to pause, to remember. Some navigators say that these simple tasks helped ground them, keeping them in tune with the rhythm of the journey. Historians still debate whether these practices were part of the necessary survival routine or if they had a deeper spiritual function. Could the daily rhythm of food preparation be seen as a way of recalibrating the navigator's mind, aligning them with the sea and sky? You ask your guide about this one evening as he meticulously arranges the meal. He pauses for a moment, considering. Everything on this boat is part of the story, he says. Simply. What we eat, what we touch, where we place our feet, it all matters. It tells us what comes next. You chew on that for a while, letting the silence between you fill with the sound of the ocean. Every small action, every choice, no matter how trivial it seems, creates the map of the journey. That night the stars return, but they're different now. You've stopped trying to force their shapes. Instead, you simply feel them tracing their paths with your mind, with your heart. You know what's coming next, even before you see it. Not because the stars told you, but because you're listening now. The sea sings its way to you, through you. You are no longer fighting it. You are a part of it. The island you've been searching for begins to reveal itself slowly, not with sudden clarity, but as a quiet unveiling, like the first sight of a long-lost friend after years apart. It's not the land that's important right now. It's the journey itself, the quiet process of becoming. Your guide leans against the mast and looks at you. There's a twinkle in his eye. It's like they said, he murmurs. You don't need to find the island. The island finds you. You nod, because you understand now. The land and the sea aren't separate things. They aren't divided by maps, by borders. They're all part of the same endless flow, one leading to the other, just as one star leads to the next. The island is close now. So close you can almost smell it, earthy, humid, and alive. And yet there's no rush. You're not desperate to touch it. You're already part of it, part of the journey, part of the sky, part of the stars. Your guide begins to sing softly, a slow, steady melody. The song rises and falls, with the sea carrying a rhythm that feels more like home than anything you've ever known. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over you, and in that moment, you realize that this feeling of being in tune is the greatest form of navigation. The canoe shifts again, responding to a new current. And you understand that you're no longer just sailing toward the island. You've already arrived. The island rises slowly, its edges soft and shaded, not yet a landmark, but a suggestion like a secret held just out of reach. You're so close now, but you don't rush. You let the canoe glide along its edge, feeling the slight curve of the earth beneath you. It's like stepping into a story you've always known, but never understood until now. Mainstream fact. The arrival on a new island wasn't just a geographical event. It was a moment of profound cultural and spiritual significance. For the Polynesians, reaching new lands was never about conquest or expansion. It was about fulfilling an ancient promise, part of a cycle that bound the ocean, the land, and the stars together. This promise of connection was woven into every canoe journey. You feel it now. The land doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a return. As the canoe edges closer to the shore, the water shifts. The tide begins to ebb, pulling away from the land, creating a current that tugs at the canoe's hull. You adjust the sail, but it's not an act of mastery. It's a conversation. A subtle response to the pulse of the earth beneath you. You glance at your guide. He's watching you, but not with the scrutiny of a teacher. There's something in his eyes that feels more like a knowing, a silent recognition that this moment has arrived, that you've become part of the rhythm of the journey. Fringe tidbit. The moment of landing was often seen as a time of renewal in many Pacific cultures. Some traditions held that upon arrival, a sacred chant was recited not just to mark the end of a journey, but to honor the island itself. The chant was meant to invoke the spirit of the land, to ask for permission to step foot on it, and to ensure a harmonious relationship between the newcomers and the environment. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely symbolic or if they were intended to establish a spiritual bond that could guide the community's survival. Were these chants a form of prayer, a negotiation with nature, or a way to honor the unseen forces that govern the land? You're not sure, but you feel it now. The land isn't just a place. It's a being. You're standing on it, but it's also standing with you. The canoe crests the final wave and nudges softly against the beach. You step out, your feet sinking into the warm sand, and for a moment, you simply stand there, feeling the earth beneath you, the salt air in your lungs, the sound of waves retreating in the distance. You're not just standing on land. You're becoming part of it, just as you once became part of the ocean. Your guide steps out beside you, and for the first time, he speaks the words you've been waiting to hear. Welcome home. You smile, knowing that it's not the destination that matters. It's the journey. The stars, the sea, the sky, they weren't separate from you. They were always with you, always part of you. And now, in this quiet moment, as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, you understand. You never really left. You've always been here, anchored in the pulse of the earth, floating between the stars. Your guide places his hand on your shoulder, gently steering you toward the village. Come. The feast awaits, but you don't hurry. Not now. You walk beside him, feet sinking slightly with each step, breathing in the cool night air. The firelight flickers in the distance, calling you forward. But for now, you stay present, just walking. Just being with the land, the sea, the sky home, 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 the sky home.